I didn't know why the palace fell silent, until the alien queen's daughter embraced the human. From a distance, it looked alive, as if it breathed with its own energy. Birds of radiant colors flew between the spires, their calls echoing softly. Yet, as Commander Elias Kane approached the gates, he noticed something strange. The usual hum of palace life was gone. Elias had visited many alien worlds, but the silence here was different. It was not peaceful, it was heavy. Guards in polished armor stood still, their faces impassive, and the gates, though open, made no welcoming sound. Even the fountains, which normally sang in crystal-clear streams, were still. Elias frowned. He had expected ceremony, music, and laughter, the grand welcome of the alien royal family, but there was none, only silence. "Commander Kane," a soft voice said behind him. Elias turned to see Lieutenant Maris, his human assistant. Her eyes were wide with curiosity and caution. "They say the palace has been like this for weeks. No events, no celebrations. The courtiers barely speak. Even the queen has not been seen." Elias nodded. He adjusted his uniform and stepped forward, his boots clicking against the polished floor of the entry hall. The interior was more impressive than he had imagined. The walls were lined with crystal panels that shifted in color, reflecting every motion in the room. Yet the grandeur could not hide the emptiness. Not a servant passed, not a single chandelier flickered. The hall felt suspended in time, as if it had stopped breathing. "Do you feel it?" Elias whispered. "Something is wrong." Maris nodded, her voice low. "Everyone says it's the palace's curse, but I don't believe in that. Something is keeping them quiet, something we cannot see." Elias frowned again. He had been trained to stay calm, to analyze, but this silence made him uneasy. He had met hostile aliens, friendly aliens, even indifferent ones. He had never seen a palace so tense, so unnaturally still. They were soon approached by a court official, a tall Xyralian with smooth silver skin and eyes that glimmered like diamonds. "Commander Kane," he said in flawless galactic standard, his tone formal and distant, "welcome to the royal palace. The queen has granted you limited access. Your presence is permitted, but be aware the palace is observing you as much as you observe it." Elias blinked. The words sounded almost like a warning. "I understand," he said carefully. "We come in peace as representatives of Earth." The official's lips curved into something like a smile, though it did not reach his eyes. "Peace, yes. But you must understand, human, some things are not to be disturbed." Elias felt a shiver run down his spine. What things could a palace guard so politely refuse to speak of? Before he could ask, the official bowed and glided away, leaving a trail of faint light in the air. Maris whispered, "He didn't even tell us where the queen is. Are we going to see her?" "Not yet," Elias said. He took a deep breath. "First, we explore, observe, learn. That is our mission." They walked down long corridors, each more magnificent than the last. Walls were etched with glowing symbols that shifted like liquid, telling stories Elias could not yet read. Floors reflected the light above as though polished by magic. Yet the deeper they went, the more he noticed it, the absence of life. Servants, guards, even courtiers seemed to have vanished. Not a single sound disturbed the echo of their footsteps. And then Elias saw her. She stood at the end of a long hall, her form tall and graceful. Princess Lyra, daughter of the Xyralian's queen, was unlike any being Elias had met. Her hair shimmered with silver threads that moved like living water. Her eyes were deep pools of light, reflecting both wisdom and sorrow. She did not speak. She did not move. She simply observed, standing perfectly still as though she were part of the palace itself. Elias stopped in his tracks, feeling a strange pull toward her. There was something in her presence that made him feel small and important at the same time. "Commander Kane," Maris said, nudging him softly. She's staring at you." Elias swallowed hard and stepped forward. "Your Highness," he said carefully, "I am honored to meet you." Lyra's eyes shifted slightly, just enough to acknowledge him, but she did not smile. "Welcome," she said, her voice soft like a breeze through crystal corridors. It carried a weight that made him stop. It was polite but not warm. Elias nodded, unsure what to do next. He had expected greetings, explanations, perhaps even a guided tour. But Lyra turned silently and began walking down the corridor, her movements like flowing water. Without thinking, Elias followed. They passed through a hall of memories, holographic images of the Xyralians' history dancing around them. Elias saw wars, alliances, and celebrations of discovery, yet none of it moved the palace today. The ghosts of the past seemed alive, but the present remained frozen. Finally, they reached the central hall, the heart of the palace. Here, the silence was heavier, almost suffocating. Elias noticed how the crystal floor reflected Lyra's image, duplicating her in dozens of shimmering forms. She stopped and turned to him. "Why do you come here?" she asked. Elias hesitated. "To learn, to understand your people. To establish friendship." Lyra studied him. "Friendship?" Her voice had a questioning edge, as if she had forgotten what it felt like. "Humans speak of courage and freedom, but you do not know silence. You do not know restraint. You do not know what it means to lose everything to tradition." Elias blinked. Her words struck him like a gentle blow. He had not expected philosophy on a first meeting, yet somehow he understood. There was history here, weight and sorrow. The silence of the palace was not empty, it was grief. "Can you show me?" he asked quietly. "Can you tell me why the palace is like this?" Lyra's eyes softened for the briefest moment. She shook her head. "Some things cannot be shown, only felt." Elias swallowed. He wanted to push further to find answers, but something in her expression warned him against it. Instead, he bowed slightly, respecting her unspoken boundary. For the first time, Lyra moved closer, and Elias noticed the faint glow of energy around her hands. The palace seemed to respond, the crystal panels flickering slightly as if alive. "Come," she said, "I will show you something few have seen." She led him through hidden corridors, twisting stairways, and silent rooms, each more secret than the last. Finally, they arrived at a balcony overlooking the palace gardens. Normally, these gardens were alive with color, music, and motion. Today, they were still. Flowers hung without breeze, water pools reflected the suns without ripple, and statues of xyralions from past centuries seemed to watch silently. "Look at it," Lyra said. "The palace holds its breath, it waits, it remembers, and it fears what it cannot control." Elias looked, understanding dawning. This was not neglect. This was restraint. This was obedience to rules older than most civilizations, and yet there was life here. He could feel it in Lyra's presence, in the quiet energy that pulsed under the crystal floors. The palace was not dead, it was waiting for something or someone. "You humans," Lyra whispered almost to herself, "you feel things too easily, you speak too much, you touch too deeply, and yet you can awaken what we have lost." Elias felt his heart skip. Her words were like fire in cold air. "Awaken?" he asked. Lyra's eyes met his, and for the first time there was a flicker of emotion, a question, a challenge, an invitation. "Perhaps," she said softly, "but you must first understand the silence. You must first listen to the palace." Elias nodded slowly. He realized that this visit would be more than diplomacy. It would be a journey into the heart of an alien civilization, and somewhere beneath the silence there was hope waiting to be found. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the crystal floors. The palace remained still, yet Elias felt a subtle shift. He was no longer just a visitor, he had been noticed. And in the quiet, he understood that the story of the xyralions and the reason for the palace's silence was only beginning. As the first part of the day ended, Elias stood beside Lyra, gazing at the endless halls of crystal and light. Somewhere deep inside, he felt the pulse of the palace, a heartbeat long hidden, waiting for the right touch to awaken it. And in that silence, the adventure began. The palace was quiet, but that did not stop the corridors from feeling alive. Commander Elias Kane walked beside Princess Lyra, careful to match her calm pace. Each step echoed faintly, but the silence seemed to hold its breath around them. Elias had never felt a place so full of history and restraint, where every corner seemed to watch him. Lyra led him through a hallway lined with ancient tapestries. Each tapestry depicted a different moment in Xyralian history. Wars with distant worlds, the first human visitors, the rise of the royal family, and strange glowing symbols that no human could fully understand. "These tapestries tell stories of power and obedience," Lyra said softly. "Our people believe that control is more important than feeling. That is why the palace is silent now. The queen fears what emotion can do to her kingdom." Elias studied the tapestries, noticing the pride in the faces of the Xyralian ancestors, and yet the same coldness that he saw in the current courtiers. "But humans feel deeply," he said. "We share joy, sadness, courage, even fear. We cannot hide it completely." Lyra's eyes flickered with interest. "Perhaps that is why your people survive. Your emotions give you strength, even when logic fails." She paused, her gaze drifting to a golden tapestry showing the first human visitors to Xyralia centuries ago. "They came here expecting a challenge, and they changed us in ways my mother fears even now." Elias felt a shiver. Change is not always bad, he said carefully. Sometimes it is necessary. Lyra smiled faintly, though it did not reach her eyes. Your words are bold. Humans are not afraid to speak, but we are. That is why my people remain quiet. That is why the palace fell silent. They reached a massive door at the end of the hallway. Lyra pressed her hand against a glowing panel, and the door slid open soundlessly. Beyond it was a library, filled with tall shelves that glimmered with alien scripts. Holographic pages floated in the air, showing maps of distant star systems, records of diplomatic missions, and rare books containing Xyralian knowledge. This is the Forbidden Wing, Lyra said. Most courtiers have never entered. The Queen fears that knowledge can lead to dangerous ideas, ideas about freedom, love, or rebellion. Elias stepped inside carefully. I never thought a library could feel powerful, he said, his voice low. It feels like it holds the heartbeat of your people, Lyra nodded. Knowledge is power, but power without understanding is dangerous. That is why we must tread carefully here. For hours, they explored the library together. Elias asked questions about human-Xyralian relations, and Lyra answered, showing both historical facts and personal insight. She explained that centuries ago, humans had inspired hope and fear among her people. They had shown courage, curiosity, and compassion, qualities that the Xyralians had largely abandoned. You humans, Lyra said, live in chaos, but you thrive. You trust your hearts as much as your minds. We trust only rules. That is why the palace is empty inside. It does not allow hearts to speak. Elias listened closely, fascinated by her perspective. He had spent years studying alien cultures, but he had never met anyone who spoke with such honesty about the limits of their own civilization. He felt an urge to ask more, to learn everything about her world, but he also noticed the careful restraint in her voice. Lyra was speaking to him, but only enough to guide him. As the hours passed, their conversation shifted. Lyra began asking Elias about humans, their feelings, their history, their customs. She wanted to know why humans risked so much for friendship, family, or love. She asked him about courage, about choices, about fear. Humans fight even when they know they may lose, she said quietly. They take risks for things they cannot control. Why do you do this? Elias thought for a moment. Because it is right, because it is necessary. Because we believe in each other even when the outcome is uncertain. That gives us strength. Lyra's eyes glimmered with something unfamiliar, awe, perhaps, or curiosity. Strength without control, how fascinating. Perhaps humans teach us what we have forgotten. Their bond grew slowly, like a small flame in the darkness. It was forbidden, unspoken, and dangerous. Yet Elias felt drawn to Lyra not just as a diplomat, but as someone who could understand the pulse of the palace, the hidden truth of its silence. And Lyra, for the first time, felt a connection that defied the rules of her world. Later, as they walked through another corridor, Elias noticed the subtle reactions of the palace itself. The crystal panels that had seemed frozen now shimmered faintly. The air seemed warmer. Even the shadows moved differently, responding to their presence. What is happening? Elias asked, surprised. Lyra glanced at him, her expression serious. The palace responds to emotions it has not felt in centuries. Your presence, it awakens small traces of what has been lost. That is dangerous. Dangerous? Elias echoed. Yes, Lyra said, her voice barely a whisper. The Queen does not allow these feelings. She fears what it could do to her rule. If she discovers that we are connected, she may forbid it forever. Worse, she may isolate me completely, and I cannot hide what I feel. Elias felt the weight of her words. The palace's silence was not merely tradition, it was control. And he, a human, had unwittingly become a spark in that control, awakening curiosity, warmth, and a sense of rebellion that had been dormant for generations. They arrived at a balcony overlooking the city below. The twin suns were setting, painting the sky in gold and crimson. Elias watched, but he also noticed Lyra's eyes. They did not see the city, they were watching him, studying him, trying to understand the heart of a human. You are different, she said softly. You do not follow the rules blindly. You listen, you feel. And yet you are brave enough to enter a world that fears your kind. Elias smiled, though it was careful. I do not know if I am brave. I just know that understanding is important, and sometimes you have to risk something to find it. Lyra's lips curved slightly. Then perhaps you are braver than most of my people, or perhaps braver than I am. The words hung in the air. There was an unspoken understanding, a connection forming that neither of them could fully explain. Elias felt it too, a thread of emotion linking them, delicate yet undeniable. As night fell, the palace became even quieter. The gardens below shimmered under soft moonlight, but they remained still, untouched by wind or life. Lyra turned to Elias, her expression serious. "Do you understand why the palace is silent?" she asked. Elias nodded slowly. "Yes, it fears emotion, it fears change, and it fears what humans can bring to it." Lyra's eyes softened. "Then you must understand something else. Even a small human heart can awaken the palace. But awakening is dangerous. The queen will not allow it, and the courtiers may turn against us. If we are discovered, consequences will be severe." Elias took a deep breath. "I understand, but if we do nothing, the palace will remain frozen, silent, and lifeless. Sometimes courage is more important than safety." Lyra studied him in silence for a moment. Then she nodded slightly, as if granting permission not just to stay, but to join her in this hidden rebellion of feeling. They spent the rest of the evening walking through secret passages, exploring hidden archives, and sharing stories of their worlds. Lyra asked about Earth, its oceans, mountains, and forests. Elias asked about Xyralaya, their customs, festivals, and family rituals. With each word, each glance, the distance between human and Xyralayan shrank, replaced by curiosity, respect, and something unspoken yet powerful. Finally, they reached the central hall again. The crystal floors reflected the moonlight, and the silence seemed less oppressive now. Elias realized that even a small human presence could shift the rhythm of the palace. Lyra turned to him, her eyes serious but softer than before. "Tomorrow you will see more, but remember, human, this connection we have is fragile. My world is not ready for it." "And yet it feels right." Elias nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "Then we move carefully," he said, "step by step." The night grew deeper. The palace, once completely silent, now seemed to hum faintly, as if responding to the emotions of two beings brave enough to defy its tradition. And somewhere in the heart of the Xyralian's kingdom, a small spark of life began to grow, waiting for the next day to unfold. Elias knew that this was only the beginning. The forbidden connection had been formed, delicate and dangerous, but powerful enough to challenge centuries of silence. And as he left the balcony, he felt a strange certainty. The palace would never be the same again. The palace was quiet, but the silence no longer felt heavy. Instead, it carried a sense of waiting, like a deep breath held for centuries. Commander Elias Kane followed Princess Lyra through another hidden corridor, one that only a few in the palace ever saw. The walls glimmered faintly, pulsing with an energy that seemed alive. "Where are we going?" Elias asked, careful to keep his voice low. "To a place few humans have ever seen," Lyra said, her silver hair catching the light of the crystals above. "A place my mother hopes you never discover." Elias raised an eyebrow. "You mean forbidden?" Lyra nodded. "Yes, but the truth of the palace cannot remain hidden forever. If you wish to understand why silence rules here, you must see it for yourself." They descended a narrow spiral staircase that led deep beneath the palace, below the gardens, below the great halls. The air grew cooler and denser as they moved, carrying the faint scent of minerals and ancient stone. Elias could hear a soft hum, almost like the pulse of the palace itself. Finally, they arrived at a massive door of dark crystal, etched with glowing symbols. "This is it," Lyra whispered. "The heart chamber." Elias looked at the door, fascinated. "The heart chamber?" Lyra nodded. "The queen built it centuries ago. It stores the memory of our people, every decision, every ritual, every lesson learned. It records joy and grief, pride and fear, but most importantly, it records emotion. That is why the palace fell silent. My mother believed emotions weaken control, so she locked them away here." Elias stepped closer, feeling the hum of the door. "How do you know all this?" Lyra hesitated. "Because I have always been curious, because I cannot accept a world without feeling, and because I want to show it to someone who can understand." With a gentle motion, she placed her hand on the door. The crystal glowed and slowly opened, revealing a vast chamber filled with floating orbs of light. Each orb contained a memory, shimmering like liquid gold. Elias could see flashes of battles, celebrations, discoveries, and farewells. The orbs pulsed softly, responding to his presence. "This is incredible," Elias breathed. "It's like the history of your entire civilization alive." Lyra nodded. "Yes, but it is more than history. It is the essence of who we are. The queen fears that if people feel too strongly, it will disrupt control. She believes emotions are dangerous. That is why the palace fell silent. Elias reached out tentatively, touching one of the orbs. Instantly, he felt a surge of energy, a memory of a great ceremony with music, laughter, and the joy of 1,000 Xyrilions. The experience was overwhelming but exhilarating. He pulled back, gasping. Lyra watched him carefully. This is what humans bring, feeling, courage. Hope the queen fears it because she cannot control it. Elias turned to her. Then your people have been living half alive? Lyra's expression darkened. Perhaps they obey, they follow rules, they survive, but the heart of Xyrilia is quiet, and it has been for generations. They moved deeper into the chamber, where the orbs became brighter, more numerous. Elias could see memories of humans visiting Xyrilia centuries ago, their actions leaving traces of courage, kindness, and defiance. Lyra pointed to one glowing orb. That human, he inspired hope in my people, she said softly. But my mother feared what he represented. That is when the queen began the silence. She believed that control required suppressing all emotions that could challenge her rule. Elias looked around, feeling both awe and sadness. So the palace's silence is fear, fear of the very thing that makes life worth living. Lyra nodded, her eyes reflecting the glow of the orbs. Exactly, and now your presence threatens that fear. You bring what humans always do, courage, hope, and the ability to feel without permission. For a moment, neither spoke. The chamber pulsed softly, responding to their presence. Elias realized that he and Lyra were no longer just visitors. They were participants in the palace's awakening. Every emotion they shared, every look, every word, stirred the ancient energy around them. Do you understand why this is dangerous? Lyra asked finally. Elias nodded. Yes, but I also understand why it is necessary. The palace cannot remain silent forever. The people, your civilization, they need to feel. Lyra's eyes softened, and for a brief moment a smile appeared. You are braver than I imagined, human. Most would fear what I have shown you. Most would turn away. Elias shook his head. I am not most humans, and I will not turn away from what is right. The chamber seemed to react to his words. The orbs glowed brighter and the hum grew louder. Lyra looked alarmed. Careful. The queen has sensors throughout the palace. She may know if we disturb the heart chamber too much. Elias stepped closer to her. Then we must be careful together. Lyra nodded, and for the first time she allowed herself to relax. They spent hours exploring the heart chamber, touching orbs, and sharing insights. Elias learned about Xyrilian history in ways no visitor ever had. He saw wars fought to protect their people, alliances made and broken, and sacrifices hidden in the shadows. But he also saw joy, art, music, and love, things that the queen had tried to suppress. This is why the palace fell silent, Elias said finally. Not because your people cannot feel, but because your leaders fear what it might do. Lyra's expression darkened. Yes. And now it is too late to return to silence. Not with you here. You have awakened something that cannot be ignored. Elias felt a thrill of fear and excitement. He realized that their bond, his connection with Lyra, was more than personal. It was a catalyst for change. Every word they spoke, every memory they touched, stirred the palace and its people. Suddenly, a low vibration ran through the floor. Elias and Lyra exchanged a glance. The sensors, Lyra whispered. We may have triggered something. We need to move carefully. They left the heart chamber slowly, careful not to disturb the energy further. The hidden corridors seemed to shift, responding to their emotions. Elias could feel it. The palace was alive, watching, waiting. As they reached the central hall, Lyra turned to him. You see, human, the palace is not silent because it is dead. It is silent because it fears life, emotion, and change. And you bring all of these things. Elias nodded. Then we must decide, do we respect the fear or do we help it awaken? Lyra's eyes sparkled with a mix of hope and worry. That is the question, and it is not an easy one. If my mother discovers what we have done, the consequences could be severe. I could be forbidden to speak to you ever again. The palace could resist, or worse, punish us. Elias reached for her hand. She did not pull away. Instead, she let him hold it, a silent agreement that whatever came next, they would face it together. The night deepened, and the palace around them seemed to breathe softly. Crystals glimmered faintly and shadows danced across the walls. Elias realized that they were no longer just visitors. They were part of the palace's story now. Every heartbeat, every emotion, every choice mattered. I am ready, Elias said quietly. If the palace will awaken, I will help it. If it resists, I will face it, with you. Lyra's lips curved in a faint smile. Then let us move carefully, human, but remember, even the smallest spark can ignite a fire that cannot be controlled. They left the hidden corridors and returned to the balcony overlooking the gardens. The twin suns had disappeared, leaving the sky lit by distant stars. Elias looked down at the still gardens and felt a strange sense of anticipation. Somewhere beneath the silence, life was stirring. Somewhere beneath the control, change was coming. Lyra spoke softly, almost to herself. Humans, always daring, always feeling. Perhaps it is time for my people to learn again. Elias nodded, understanding the truth in her words. The palace's silence had lasted centuries, but it would not last forever. With courage, hope, and human determination, even the oldest traditions could be challenged. And somewhere deep inside the heart chamber, the orbs pulsed brighter, as if acknowledging the presence of those brave enough to awaken them. For Elias and Lyra, the journey was only beginning. Secrets lay beneath the spires, waiting to be revealed. Challenges loomed ahead. And the palace, once silent in fear, was beginning to remember the power of life, feeling, and courage. The forbidden connection had been tested, and its strength was growing. But the greatest trials and the greatest awakenings were still to come. The palace slept under the twin moons, but its silence was no longer absolute. Commander Elias Kane and Princess Lyra moved carefully through the corridors, their footsteps echoing faintly against the crystal walls. Every hall, every staircase, every shadow seemed to respond to their presence. They had learned the palace was alive, not in the way humans understood life, but in a way that felt deeply connected to the emotions of those who dared enter its hidden spaces. Lyra paused at the top of a spiral staircase, her hand resting on the glowing crystal railing. "Tonight," she whispered, "we risk more than ever. What we do now may awaken the palace or provoke my mother. Are you ready?" Elias met her gaze, feeling the weight of her words. "I am ready. If the palace can feel, if it can change, then I will not hesitate." Lyra's eyes softened, and she took a deep breath. "Then follow me." They left the main corridors and entered a passage that few courtiers had ever walked. The walls here were darker, the crystals dimmer, but the hum of energy was stronger. Elias felt it in his chest, a vibration that seemed almost alive. It was the pulse of the palace responding to their courage. At the end of the passage, they arrived at a balcony overlooking the central courtyard. Below, the gardens were bathed in moonlight. Statues of Xyralian ancestors loomed silently, their faces calm but unyielding. The fountains were still, the trees unmoving, and yet Elias could sense the palace's attention. It was watching, waiting, anticipating. Lyra stepped closer to the edge. "This is where it must happen," she said softly. "The palace will feel what we feel. It may resist or it may respond, but it cannot ignore us." Elias looked down at the courtyard, then back at her. "You mean an embrace?" Lyra nodded, her expression serious. "Yes. One that is not just human or Xyralian, but something that transcends both. A connection that awakens life where there has been silence for centuries." Elias felt his heart race. He had faced hostile worlds, deadly creatures, and impossible odds, but this felt different. This was personal. This was a test of courage in a way he had never imagined. And yet he knew it was right. He stepped forward and took her hand. Lyra's fingers were cool, almost ethereal, but the connection sparked a warmth that spread through both of them. Elias felt the palace respond immediately. The crystals along the balcony shimmered faintly, the hum growing louder, and distant corridors seemed to pulse with light. Lyra's voice trembled slightly. "Are you certain, human?" "I am," Elias said firmly. "If this is what it takes to awaken the palace, then we do it together." She nodded, and for the first time she stepped closer. Their hands met fully, their eyes locked, and the palace seemed to hold its breath. Slowly, carefully, Lyra allowed herself to lean toward Elias, and he did the same. Their embrace was gentle, respectful, but charged with emotion, a bond that transcended tradition, culture, and expectation. The moment their hearts touched, the palace responded. The crystals around them pulsed with a warm, radiant glow. The walls seemed to hum, a low vibration that resonated through the very floor. Fountains below shimmered as if the water itself had awakened. Statues appeared to soften, their faces reflecting something almost human. Elias felt the energy course through him, a mixture of awe, fear, and exhilaration. Lyra held him tightly, her eyes closed, and for the first time she allowed herself to feel freely without fear. The palace was alive, responding to their courage, their trust, their connection. But the response was not without risk. Alarms, a subtle vibration rather than sound, started in distant halls. The queen's sensors had noticed the shift. Courtiers in hidden chambers began to stir, their curiosity and fear awakened. The energy of the palace grew unstable, as though it were deciding whether to accept or reject this new emotion. Lyra whispered urgently, "We must control it, or the palace may resist too strongly. Hold steady." Elias focused, steadying his breath. He realized that their embrace was more than a gesture of affection. It was a key, a spark capable of unlocking centuries of suppressed energy. They were not just defying tradition, they were rewriting it. As they held each other, visions began to appear within the glowing crystals. Elias saw fleeting images of Xyralian history, not as records but as living memories. Children laughing in sunlit gardens, artists painting with colors that shifted like light, couples dancing under the twin moons. The palace had witnessed joy, and it remembered. And now, for the first time in centuries, it was being reminded that such feelings could exist again. Lyra spoke softly, almost reverently. "Do you see, human? The palace is alive. It is not meant to be silent forever. We can awaken it if we are brave enough." Elias nodded, feeling a swell of hope. "Then we continue, together." They remained on the balcony, holding the embrace, and the palace slowly began to transform. The crystal walls reflected colors that no human name could describe. Corridors that had been dark for centuries began to glow faintly. The hum of energy grew into a harmonious resonance that filled the halls with life. Below, the courtyard gardens responded. Flowers shimmered as if catching their first sunlight, fountains began to ripple with crystal-clear water, and statues seemed to breathe with quiet relief. The entire palace had begun to awaken from its long slumber. Yet even as the beauty unfolded, danger remained. From the highest spire, Elias saw a figure watching them. The queen herself, silent but imposing, her presence commanding every corner of the palace. Her eyes glimmered with recognition and something else, anger perhaps, or fear. Lyra tightened her grip on Elias. "She knows," she whispered, "and she will act if she must." Elias felt a chill, but he did not let go. "We cannot stop now. The palace is responding. This is bigger than fear." Lyra nodded, her silver hair catching the glow of the awakening crystals. "Then we hold fast. Whatever comes, we hold fast." The queen moved through the palace with precision, her gaze sweeping over the corridors, sensing the shift in energy. Yet even she could not fully resist the change. The palace itself pulsed, and the energy of Elias and Lyra's connection made it clear. The old rules were being rewritten. Inside the palace, courtiers and servants began to stir. Some watched in awe, unsure whether to follow the new energy or maintain obedience. Others whispered to one another, sensing the possibility of freedom after centuries of silence. The palace was alive in ways no one had experienced for generations. Lyra looked at Elias, her eyes shining. "Do you feel it? The palace is listening, learning, remembering. We have started something that cannot be undone." Elias smiled, though his chest was still heavy with tension. "Then we must be careful and brave and ready for whatever comes next." The energy of their embrace continued to grow, spreading throughout the palace. Walls shimmered, corridors lit up, and distant chambers vibrated with the awakening pulse. Even the heart chamber, deep beneath the spires, glowed with renewed brilliance. The suppressed emotions of the Xyralian people were surfacing, responding to the courage and connection of two beings willing to defy tradition. But Elias and Lyra knew the challenge was not over. The queen's presence loomed like a shadow over the palace. She could resist, punish, or even attempt to regain control. Yet in that moment, Elias understood something powerful. Even the oldest traditions, the strictest rules, could be changed with courage, hope, and human determination. Lyra released a small sigh, breaking the embrace, but their hands remained linked. "We have done it," she said softly. "The palace is awake, but the queen, she will not approve." Elias nodded. "Then we face her together. The palace will not fall silent again, not with us here." They stepped back from the balcony, leaving the courtyard alive with shimmering colors, moving water, and faint whispers of sound. The palace was no longer a silent monument to fear. It was vibrant, alive, and watching them. Every crystal, every wall, every corridor seemed aware of the change they had begun. Lyra turned to Elias, her expression both fearful and hopeful. "Tomorrow, we must confront my mother. She will demand answers, and she may not like what she sees." Elias placed a hand on her shoulder. Then we tell the truth. We show her that courage and connection are not weaknesses, they are strengths. That is what humans do. That is what you have allowed me to show you. Lyra nodded, her eyes reflecting the glowing crystals. Yes. And perhaps she will see what the palace has been missing all these centuries. As they walked back through the newly illuminated halls, the palace seemed to pulse with energy, as if breathing for the first time in generations. Courtiers and servants began to emerge from their hidden chambers, watching the transformation in awe. The silence that had defined the palace for centuries was gone. Elias realized then that their embrace was more than a moment, it was a turning point. The palace would never be silent again, and the story of the Xyrilions of humans and of what courage and connection could achieve was entering a new chapter. Above, in the highest spires, the twin moons reflected in the crystal towers. The palace was awake, and its heart had begun to beat again, stronger, brighter, and filled with possibility. And in that moment, Elias and Lyra knew that the first light of the twin suns shone across the palace spires, reflecting off the crystal towers like millions of tiny stars. Commander Elias Kane and Princess Lyra stood together on the central balcony, watching the palace stir with life for the first time in centuries. Crystals glimmered, corridors pulsed with energy, and distant chambers echoed faintly with the beginnings of sound, soft music, laughter, whispers of conversation. Yet even in this moment of triumph, tension hung in the air. The queen had been silent since the previous night, and Lyra knew that confrontation was inevitable. The palace had awakened, but not all hearts were ready to embrace change. "She will come," Lyra said softly, her hand brushing against Elias'. "Mother will demand answers. She will not understand why we did this." Elias nodded, tightening his grip on her hand. "Then we show her, we tell her the truth. The palace needed to feel again. It was not wrong to awaken it. It was necessary." Lyra looked at him with admiration and relief. "You humans, you always speak so boldly. I wish my people had learned courage like yours long ago." Before Elias could reply, the doors to the central hall opened with a quiet hum. The queen entered, her presence commanding the space. She moved with the elegance of centuries of rule, her eyes sharp and alert. The crystal walls seemed to shimmer with deference as she passed, and every member of the court fell silent, waiting for her command. "Lyra," the queen said, her voice firm yet measured. "Explain this disturbance. Why has the palace, silent for generations, begun to awaken in the middle of the night?" Lyra stepped forward, her silver hair catching the sunlight. "Mother, I have shown him the heart chamber. I have shared the truths that the palace has held for centuries. Commander Elias is not responsible for the awakening. He simply helped me see what I had long forgotten, that life, emotion, and courage are stronger than silence." The queen's eyes narrowed. "And you, princess, have disobeyed the rules. You have invited a human into forbidden spaces. You have disturbed the balance of this palace. Do you not understand the risks?" Elias stepped forward, feeling the weight of centuries of silence pressing against him. "Your Majesty," he said, voice steady, "with all respect, the palace has been alive all along. It has just been suppressed by fear. Humans, and even your people, are capable of emotion, courage, and hope. Suppression only hides what is natural. Awakening it does not weaken the palace, it strengthens it." For a moment, the queen did not speak. Her gaze swept over the central hall, taking in the shimmering corridors, the pulsing crystals, and the small gatherings of courtiers and servants who had begun to whisper in awe. The palace itself seemed to pulse in response to Elias' words, as though validating them. Lyra continued, her voice calm but determined. "Mother, this palace has been silent because of fear. Fear of emotion, fear of change, fear of what humans and our own people could bring. But courage cannot be stopped. The palace has felt it now and it responds. We cannot undo it, nor should we want to." The queen's eyes softened slightly, though her posture remained commanding. "You speak boldly, human, and you, Lyra, speak with audacity. But the rules exist for a reason. They protect the kingdom, maintain order, prevent chaos." Elias shook his head. "Order without feeling is not protection, it is imprisonment. The palace may have been strong, but it was silent. Now it can grow stronger because it can feel. It can learn, it can respond. That is true strength." The queen's expression wavered. She looked at the pulsing crystals, the faint glow of the gardens below, and even the statues that seemed to move imperceptibly. The palace itself had awakened in ways she could not fully control, and in that moment she realized Elias spoke the truth. Lyra stepped closer to her mother. Mother, the palace has remembered joy, hope, and life. It is not chaos, it is awakening. We can guide it. We can embrace what has been lost without abandoning discipline, but we must allow it to feel, to live. The queen's gaze lingered on her daughter and on Elia's. Slowly, she nodded. Perhaps I have feared too much. Perhaps the silence was not protection, but denial. Elias felt a surge of relief, but he did not relax. Change would not be instant. The palace had centuries of tradition to unlearn, and the queen's decision now would determine the future of her people. Then let it awaken fully, Lyra said, her voice firm. Let the palace feel. Let the courtiers and citizens see that life is more than obedience, that courage, love, and hope are strengths, not weaknesses. The queen closed her eyes briefly, taking a deep breath. When she opened them again, there was a new light in her gaze. Very well, she said. The palace will awaken, but we guide it carefully. We ensure that strength grows without destroying what we have built. Elias smiled, feeling the palace respond. The crystals around them shimmered more brightly, corridors glowed, and distant chambers resonated with energy. Music began to hum softly from hidden halls. The silence was gone, replaced with life, movement, and hope. Lyra's hand remained in his. You see, human, courage does not just change people, it can change civilizations. Elias nodded. And humans, we have always believed in hope, even in the darkest places. That is why we survive, why we inspire, and why we awaken the impossible. The queen observed them quietly, her expression unreadable at first. Then slowly she approached the balcony and placed a hand on the railing beside Elias and Lyra. I see now, she said softly. Perhaps I have underestimated what emotion and connection can achieve. Perhaps the palace needed this awakening. Courtiers and servants who had gathered in the central hall whispered to one another in amazement. Some approached cautiously, others hesitated, but all felt the palace's pulse, the energy that Elias and Lyra had begun to release. For generations, they had lived in silence and obedience. Now they were witnesses to courage, trust, and life itself. The palace gardens below shimmered with motion. Fountains rippled with crystal-clear water, and flowers seemed to bloom in the sunlight. Statues softened, and even the air itself seemed to carry a light energy, responding to the renewed life within the palace walls. Elias and Lyra stepped forward together. The queen followed, her presence commanding but no longer fearful. The palace had awakened, and its heartbeat was visible, tangible, and powerful. You have shown me what I forgot, the queen said to Lyra. The palace is not only rules and tradition, it is also life. It is emotion, courage, and hope. And perhaps it always needed someone brave enough to remind it of that. Lyra smiled, tears of relief and joy glimmering in her eyes. Thank you, Mother, and thank you, human. Without your courage, none of this would have been possible. Elias bowed slightly. It is an honor to help, Your Majesty. The palace and your people are stronger than any one rule. Courage and hope can awaken even the oldest civilizations. The queen nodded, her expression softening fully. Then let the palace continue to awaken. Let our people feel again. Let our civilization grow stronger, guided by wisdom and courage, not fear and silence. In that moment, the palace transformed completely. Crystal spires shimmered like sunlight on water. Corridors pulsed with energy and sound. Courtiers and servants walked freely, sharing smiles, laughter, and conversation for the first time in centuries. Music filled the halls, soft at first, then growing louder. The palace, once silent, was now alive with life and hope. Lyra turned to Elias. You see, human. What you call courage, it can awaken even the oldest hearts. Elias smiled. And what humans call hope, it can inspire civilizations, even beyond our stars. The queen watched them quietly for a moment, then placed a hand on Lyra's shoulder. You have reminded me and my people that courage and emotion are not weaknesses, they are strengths. The palace and our civilization will never be silent again. Elias felt a surge of pride. Humanity had left its mark not through weapons or power, but through courage, understanding, and connection. He had helped awaken a civilization, and in doing so, reminded even an ancient queen that life is stronger than fear. As the day continued, the palace hummed with activity. The gardens sparkled, fountains danced, and light flowed through corridors that had been dark for centuries. The courtiers moved with new energy, smiling and greeting one another. The palace had been reborn, and the people would carry that awakening forward. Lyra and Elias stood together, watching the sunrise over the crystal towers. The palace had remembered life, courage, and hope. And humanity, through one human's bravery and heart, had reminded an alien civilization of what they had lost. "Do you see, human?" Lyra said softly. "This is what courage and connection can do. Even the oldest rules, even the strongest fears can be changed." Elias nodded. "And this is what humans bring wherever we go. Courage, hope, and the belief that life is meant to be lived." The palace shimmered around them, alive, vibrant, and free. And for the first time in centuries, it would never fall silent again.